Yo, it's Ethan McKinley's Questionable. Hit the music. Ba, 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 ba. Graham Hancock, welcome to the show. Hello everyone, I'm Ethan McKinley. This is Questionable. We have the legend, if you will, Graham Hancock, the author of The Sign of the Seal, Fingerprints of the Gods, and of course its sequel, which is this year's Magicians of the Gods, which I guess you're in the middle of the book tour for. Is that right, Graham?
Yes, I am. I've pretty much finished the United Kingdom book tour. I have one more event on the 7th of November. And then on the 8th of November, I fly to the States, and I'm going to be there for weeks and weeks, touring all over there, promoting the book as well.
Sure. What's the book tour been like so far? Because the first question I need to ask you, really, we'll get to this actually. For those that don't know, for the three listeners maybe out there that don't know who you are, although I can't think why, this journey began for you really with The Sign and the Seal, which is what your search for the Lost Ark, which gave you the moniker The Real Life Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
How did that begin for you?
That moniker is traded around much too often. How did it begin for me? Well, I used to be a journalist. I was totally interested in current affairs, not in ancient mysteries at all. But my journalism, I was the East Africa correspondent for The Economist. I was based in Nairobi in Kenya, and I traveled frequently to Ethiopia. And it turns out that Ethiopia claims to possess the Lost Ark of the Covenant. And back in 1982 or 83, shortly after the Raiders of the Lost Ark movie had come out, that seemed to me like a very interesting story to follow. So I began to follow it initially as a journalist, but it was taking me right off my patch of current affairs and into another patch altogether. And the transition took me the best part of a decade, but I eventually published that book in 1992. And from then, I've really been focused on antiquity and ancient mysteries and the obscure and hidden aspects of our past. It's still an investigative job. It's just not current affairs anymore.
Sure. Does it wear on you at all? Because I noticed there was a month ago, there was a kind of a piece in the Times about you decrying your book slightly, although they didn't seem to have read it. You had the banned TED Talk.
It's a curious thing. What I found over the years, having been a bit of a controversial figure, is that the mainstream media have a pre-existing narrative about me, which if ever they are going to publish a story about me, which they don't do that often these days, but okay, I have a new book out. If they're going to publish a story about me, then they refer to the pre-existing narrative. They don't actually bother to read the book or talk to me. This is how it was done with the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago. They published a big profile of Graham Hancock and his new book, Magicians of the Gods. The only problem was they never talked to me. Sure. They didn't even pick up the telephone and call me. And they didn't read the book either. So all kinds of ideas were attributed to me that I didn't have. Now, I don't know what's changed, but in the old days when I actually was a working journalist, I would never have conceived of profiling an individual without at least speaking to that person. I mean, Google, and Wikipedia don't do the trick. Sure. When you can actually pick up a telephone and talk to the guy. But why do they need to pick up a telephone? Because they've already decided what the story is about, and all they have to do is just churn that out again. I'm very weary with the mainstream media. They try to make my work look. They focus on sensational aspects of my work. They want me to be seen and typecast as a quote-unquote pseudo-scientist or pseudo-archaeologist, although I never claimed to be either and wouldn't wish to be either. And generally, I'm typecast as a believer in angels, somebody who thinks that aliens built the pyramids. None of these things are actually my views or my beliefs, but it's astonishing how often they are churned out in lazy, idle media reports.
Sure. Well, I mean, TED did the similar thing. Was it last year when they kind of banned a talk and took you offline essentially, and then it was, I guess, public pressure that got that reinstated in a sense, but very hard to find.
It was never reinstated. It was put on what my friend Rupert Sheldrake calls the naughty corner of the TED website, because both his talk and my talk were exploring ideas relating to consciousness that a certain faction of science that advises TED doesn't regard as correct. Sure. So it seems that there's a party line at TED, and Rupert and I crossed that party line. But TED, by banning our talks, created a huge furore on the internet, completely shot themselves in the foot. And it ended up with Rupert's talk and my talk, I think, getting far more views than they would ever have had if they'd, just been TED talks.
Sure. Does it wear on you at all as a person, or a soul, if you will, that these people come out of the woodwork whenever there's something, well, with you especially, with your talks or your books?
Yeah, it does wear on me. It's psychically painful to be constantly misrepresented and
Sure.
attacked in offensive and ignorant ways. As a matter of fact, I got so sick of all of that I really felt I would never write another book on the lost civilization theme. I felt with Underworld, which I published in 2002, which followed a succession of other books going back to Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, Keeper of Genesis, Heaven's Mirror, and so on and so forth. I felt really I've done this. I don't need to put up with this shit anymore from academics and their friends in the media, and I'm going to go away and have some fun. But the trouble was that new developments started to happen in the field. New evidence started to come out concerning a global cataclysm between 13,000 and 12,000 years ago, which was a central focus of Fingerprints of the Gods.
Sure.
And newly discovered archaeological sites that are literally rewriting history. So I finally reached the conclusion I couldn't turn my back on this. I had to get back in the water, and getting back in the water involves dealing with the hacks and
Sure.
their predetermined narrative about me, and the hatred of certain sectors of academia, not the whole of academia by any means, but archaeologists have a tough time with me and feel that they must take every opportunity to explain that my ideas are worthless,
No, absolutely. Well, the book, of course, Magicians of the Gods, I guess a theme throughout your work is this global cataclysm when the Earth, I guess, was either hit by an asteroid or there was a crust, a total drift of the crust.
Well, look, when I wrote Fingerprints of the Gods, I knew there'd been a cataclysm, but I didn't really know what it had been. And
Sure.
I explored a number of possibilities. The cataclysmic events are richly and powerfully remembered in myths and traditions all around the world. And there's many indications, which I went into in depth in 1995 in Fingerprints of the Gods, that point to the period between 13,000 years ago and 12,000 years ago. And I speculated on what might have happened. It was obvious that something very bad had happened. It had involved massive flooding. It had involved climate change. The whole world seemed to have been turned over. But what has happened since then, and why I've gone back to this, is that since 2007, we now have a formidable body of new science, really detailed science published in important journals like the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences or the Journal of Geology, which is documenting the fact, no longer a theory, the fact that the Earth was hit by several fragments of a large comet 12,800 years ago, exactly in that window that I had always suggested there had been a global cataclysm. Now we don't have to look around for what the cataclysm might have been. We have the smoking gun. The new science that the Earth was hit by a comet 12,800 years ago changes everything. It puts an extinction level event right in the backyard of history, and that makes it very doubtful that the story of the origins of civilization that we've been told by historians and archaeologists so far, it makes it very doubtful that that story is entirely correct, because they have not taken into account this extinction level cataclysm right there at the beginning of what they think of as the story of human history and civilization.
Sure. So where would this crater be if we were struck by it? Is it the tail of a comet or the fragments of a comet exactly? Around 11,000 years old?
Comets have a habit of breaking up into fragments. Comets are masses of ice binding together huge quantities of rock. So they're rocky, icy masses flying through the heavens. They can be as much as 300 kilometers in diameter. And because the rocky elements are bound together by ice, they have a tendency to break into fragments. And those fragments can be very large. You can have 6-kilometer wide fragments of solid rock breaking off from a comet. And anybody who was around in 1994 and watching television will remember Shoemaker-Levy 9, the comet that broke into more than 20 fragments, all of which plowed into Jupiter, with the planet Jupiter, with devastating effect. So, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at 4 pieces at least of a very large comet, pieces in the range of a mile in diameter, that hit the North American ice cap. 12,800 years ago, we were still in the Ice Age. There was an ice cap 2 miles deep covering North America, everywhere north of New York. And that's where the primary impacts were. And that's why, until quite recently, we've had impact proxies, nanodiamonds, carbon spherules, melt glass, the characteristic products of a high impact, high energy impact, distributed across a large part of the world's surface. But now we're also starting to find the remnant craters. Of course, there are not massive craters because the craters were excavated in ice and the ice melted away, but the shock effects on the ground underneath in the northeastern part of North America are now very visible. So this has gone beyond the level of being a proposal. This is solid documented science. We had an extinction level cataclysm 12,800 years ago. It changed everything, and it hasn't yet been taken into account by historians and archaeologists in their models of the origins of civilization.
Sure. So this civilization that was around like at least 11, 12,000 years ago, what would it be? Would it be a spacefaring civilization? Would it be something similar to us? Would there be hunter-gatherers plus like indigenous people plus a civilization? Or
well, the first thing to bear in mind is that the world we live in today is a world that includes hunter-gatherers, for example, in the Amazon basin or in the Kalahari Desert, and that includes an advanced civilization. So the notion of an advanced civilization coexisting with people who are hunter-gatherers should not be strange to us, since we are doing that today. And that's what I'm proposing was the case during the Ice Age. I'm proposing that there were plenty of hunter-gatherers all over the world, and we know all about them, but there was also, based upon what appears to have been an island landmass, a much more advanced civilization. I don't think that they were spacefarers. I think that where the evidence that comes down suggests a level of technology equivalent to our own at the end of the 18th century or the early 19th century. In other words, these were people who could map the Earth, who could explore the Earth, who had ships, who had mathematics, who had geometry, who had trigonometry, who studied astronomy. They were in many respects a very advanced civilization. By the standards of our civilization today, we might think our technology far superior to theirs. But by comparison with the rest of the world during the Ice Age, they were far, far ahead. And this is remembered in myths and traditions, and it was they that were hit most devastatingly by the consequences of this cataclysm between 13,000 and 12,000 years ago.
Sure. And then I suppose, like you said in the book, there'd be a handover of sorts, a passing down of either technology or knowledge or something to the indigenous peoples, right?
I think what we see at sites, really anomalous sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Is a transfer of technology. You see, until very recently, it had been thought that the timeline of human history had been worked out, that we were hunter-gatherers for tens of thousands of years. And then about 11,000 years ago, we began to experiment with what's called the Neolithic and building up the first large-scale settlements, places like Çatalhöyük in Turkey about 9,000 years ago, and then moving on from there until we get the megalithic adventure. All over the world, suddenly huge megaliths appear, which are thought to be about 5,000 years old, and at the same time, we get the appearance of big cities like we find in ancient Egypt or in ancient Mesopotamia. And Göbekli Tepe throws a huge spanner in the works of that, because Göbekli Tepe, we can be sure of its dating because it was deliberately buried by whoever made it. The site was preserved intact for more than 10,000 years. We can be sure that Göbekli Tepe is 11,600 years old. Whoa. That makes it 7,000 years older than Stonehenge, for example. And by the way, once you take the whole site of Göbekli Tepe into account, including what's still buried under the ground, it's about 50 times bigger than Stonehenge. But Stonehenge has a background 4,500 years ago. Göbekli Tepe, 11,500 years ago, has no background at all. It just comes out of nowhere, a fully evolved site with huge megaliths. Whoever put that together knew how to organize labor. This is an area with no water. They were bringing hundreds of people there, feeding them, providing them with water, sheltering them, and planning an enormous site with very accurate astronomical alignments. So this is a people who knew how to make megalithic architecture. They knew how to cut huge 20-ton, 30-ton blocks of stone. They knew how to carve them. They knew how to move them, and they knew how to stand them up, and they knew how to organize themselves. In other words, they had specialists. This is not what we expect of a hunter-gatherer society. This is a very different kind of society, and yet all the indications are that hunter-gathering was going on in the Göbekli Tepe area at that time. So the conclusion I come to is that what we're looking at Göbekli Tepe is a transfer of technology, that the survivors of a lost civilization who already knew everything that needed to be known about megalithic architecture settled in that area 11,600 years ago and transferred their knowledge to the indigenous inhabitants. And that's why the other mystery, that at exactly the same time that we see megalithic architecture suddenly appear in Turkey, in exactly the same area, we see the sudden diffusion of agricultural knowledge. Both things happen at once. And for me, rather than hypothesizing some incredibly inspired hunter-gatherer group that woke up one morning and decided to invent agriculture and invent megalithic architecture, I would say we're looking at a transfer of technology. Those skills were brought into that area by people who already knew how to do them.
Sure. Has anyone actually ventured into the structure of Göbekli Tepe deep enough to kind of find out maybe what's in there? A bit like the King's Chamber in a sense, and the hidden chambers within the large pyramid at Giza. I've actually been there when I was 13, but I guess it was sadly wasted. I actually went into the pyramid. I'm not sure if you could even do that now.
You can go into the Great Pyramid.
You can, yeah. No, I went in there, but it was a school trip, but sadly wasted on a 13-year-old boy. I'd like to go back there. Is it a dangerous place to visit now?
To go back to Egypt?
Yeah. I mean, you work with Robert Baval and stuff, obviously.
Yeah.
You fence with Zahi Hawass quite a lot.
Yes, I recently had an encounter with Zahi Hawass.
Yeah.
A sort of debate. Egypt is no more dangerous than anywhere else, in my view. I mean, the world is a slightly crazy place at the moment, and people are behaving in knee-jerk manners defined by ancient religious ideas. But there is danger anywhere. I don't think Egypt is any more dangerous than anywhere else, and I think that the Egyptians are making a considerable effort to keep their country friendly for tourists, because tourism is a very important part of their business, and the Egyptians have suffered terribly from the withdrawal of tourism from Egypt in the last few years.
Sure. Well, like you said, I mean, it was the Syrian scholar, what was his name, Khalid al-Saad, his head was cut off for not...
Yes, I know. Well, yes, I mean, these Abrahamic death cults, they really will do anything. None of them are any better than the other, whether it's Christianity, Judaism, or Islam. They're locked in an old model that doesn't serve the world or humanity anymore. And we need to move on from that. We need to throw those ancient ideas in the bin and come up with new ideas that respect and nurture our shared humanity.
Well, I think it's perhaps a token of humanity that they reject new ideas. I mean, you and your work will attest to that, obviously, that it's rarely accepted. It takes many, many years. I mean, do you think
it's a curious thing. But first of all, let's be clear: not all new ideas are right. There's sense in science filtering the information that it buys into. It's sensible, because there's just so much information out of there, and we need some. We need some logic and some reason applied to this. So I understand the defense mechanism of scientists and archaeologists presented with ideas that contradict everything they believe in, to say that those ideas must be wrong. But I think that this response has been unhelpful in the field of archaeology. Again and again, what we've seen in the field of archaeology is the existing theory of archaeology surviving even when contradictory facts appear. The contradictory facts are simply dismissed or ignored, and the existing theory is maintained. I think we're in what is referred to as a paradigm shift or a scientific revolution. We're seeing the death throes of the old model of our past fiercely defended by mainstream archaeology, and we're seeing the glimpses of a new model of our past, which will give us a completely different idea of ourselves and what we're doing here. We're seeing those first glimpses coming through, pieces of evidence that can't be explained by the existing paradigm, and a sense that this feeling that we've lost something from our story that haunts so many of us is based on absolute reality.
Yeah. Well, you could argue these Abrahamic death cults are in place to kind of prevent that information from coming forward, in a sense. Do you think, well, I think you've mentioned this in previous interviews. I've heard you talk about that perhaps the Abrahamic God is actually a demon. of sorts.
Well, yes, that was certainly the view of the Gnostics, who were an intriguing spiritual movement in the early centuries of Christianity, just before Christianity and just after Christianity. And indeed, the evidence is that the first Christians were Gnostics, but that there was a kind of coup within Christianity which led to the faction that became the Roman Catholic Church taking control. But those first Gnostics had very radical ideas about the entity that we are taught to believe is God, whether you call him Jehovah or Yahweh or Allah for that matter. He's the same entity. And from the Gnostic point of view, this was fundamentally a demonic entity, an imposter that was pretending to be God, that had deluded mankind into worshipping him or it as a god, but in fact was demonic and sought to snuff out the divine spark in man rather than to nurture that divine spark. And I think the Gnostic analysis is really worth looking into when we consider the ways that these three mainstream monotheistic Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, have divided up the world, have been locked in conflict, have created and multiplied so much intolerance and so much arrogance and cruelty. This really is demonic behavior. This is not godlike. It's not what we would expect of a god. It's what we'd expect of a demon.
Sure. What do you think the religion of this prior civilization may have been? Because I think in some of the architecture, when I saw you at the talk at Foyles where we met, you've got these H-shaped blocks, I believe, which is at Tiwanaku, Bolivia.
One of the curiosities which I've drawn attention to in Magicians of the Gods is that there are certain iconographic synchronicities all around the world, which are either meaningless coincidences or they speak to something going on behind the scenes of history. And obviously I think the latter, and I try to document that thoroughly in the book. So there's a certain pattern on statues of the way the arms and the hands are placed across the belly, which we find the Göbekli Tepe megalithic pillars, which are T-shaped, are anthropomorphic in form. They symbolically represent human beings, the head of the T being the head of the individual, and then there are frequently arms and hands carved onto these pillars at Göbekli Tepe, and exactly the same posture and even pretty much the same belt on the figure is found on the other side of the world in Easter Island, for example. They're really stunning comparisons between the two sites, which should cause us to reconsider the age that we attribute to Easter Island, and indeed more broadly to many other megalithic sites around the world. Then again, another curiosity is the
man bag.
Well, there's the man. The man bags, as I've come to call them, bearded figures depicted in the art of many cultures around the world, who are holding a very curious looking bag and holding it in a very distinctive fashion with the fingers displayed. And this is found in cultures that had no connection with one another, supposedly. So it looks to me like, particularly since they are associated with civilizing heroes, it looks to me like a kind of badge of office of a group of people who went round the world trying to spread the benefits of civilization. And then, amongst many other examples, there's the pattern that we would recognize as the capital letter H, which, of course, I'm not saying that's what it was 12,000 years ago, but it appears at Göbekli Tepe, just as the man bags do, and it appears in Tiwanaku, in Bolivia as well. So again, if these were isolated incidents, they might not mean very much, but when they're taken all together, they start to assume the form of a pattern, and that pattern suggests a remote common source for these ideas, not distribution of the ideas within historical times, but a distribution of these ideas before history began, so that they filtered down in many different parts of the world in many different ways, but they keep their core identity.
Sure. Do you have any theories on how they machined these pieces of rock and stone and how they transported them and stuff?
Yes, I mean, this is a haunting question when we're confronted, for example, by a site like Baalbek in the Lebanon, which I visited while I was researching Magicians of the Gods. In Baalbek, we have blocks of stone built into a wall that are 30 feet above the ground, and these blocks of stone weigh 900 tons each. 900 tons. There's 3 of them in a row. They're 30 feet above the ground, and it really is. It really is quite difficult to understand how this was done. And even if we invent elaborate contraptions that might have managed to do it within the known technology of the time, you're still left with the question of why anybody would do this.
Do Egyptologists still purport the theory of the slaves and the rolling on like logs and things and stuff with all this?
Well, you won't hear many Egyptologists talking about slaves these days, because ancient Egypt was not a country that was big into slavery. I mean, this is one of the pieces of completely egregious nonsense that is talked about ancient Egypt. One hears this rumor that the Great Pyramid was built by slaves.
Sure.
Quite often, it's claimed that they were Jewish slaves which gets the whole biblical chronology out of whack, But nevertheless, this claim is made. Actually, there were no slaves in the Old Kingdom. And anybody who's really studied the Great Pyramid, personally, I've climbed the Great Pyramid 5 times, will immediately be aware that we are looking at a work of high accomplishment. This is the work of master craftsmen at the peak of their skill, dedicating themselves entirely to this extraordinary project. You would not get workmanship of that level. Everything about it, everything is highly skilled. You would not get work at that level if it were being done by gangs of slaves. In fact, you wouldn't even have a standing pyramid. The whole thing would not be there. We are looking at a stunning architectural achievement, which is the product of enormous depth of knowledge and science.
So do you think machines maybe carried these things, or some form of like telepathy or levitation, or any kind of crazy theory I can come up with right now?
The most interesting ancient accounts speak of sound being used to levitate large blocks of stone. There are multiple accounts of that kind which are dismissed by archaeology as primitive fantasies. Maybe we are looking at the descriptions of a technology we don't understand. We know that sound can affect matter. Indeed, sound can affect human consciousness as well. But we know that with sound we can affect matter, we can make patterns appear. Small objects have already been lifted in the laboratory using sound, and it may be the case that a whole technology based on sound that we have not explored was deployed by the ancients. And I think the other thing we need to take into account is we should stop looking for ourselves in the past.
Sure.
And that's one of the main mistakes I think that archaeologists and historians make. We should stop looking for ourselves. We should look for a past that speaks to us in its own way. And when the past of the lost civilization speaks to us, it speaks to us of a way of doing things that was very different from our own. I would say we're a culture that has allowed the powerful faculties of the human mind to lapse, and I would say the evidence is that in antiquity, these powerful faculties, telepathy, telekinesis, for example, were harnessed and were used. Those powers still exist, but they're in a very dormant state in modern humanity.
Well, I guess because we're in this like Western style of thinking now, if you can't touch, taste, or feel it, it doesn't exist, right?
This is the Western way, and it's a peculiar kind of arrogance. I don't mean to diminish the accomplishments of the technological revolution that we have witnessed in the last 300 years. They're really quite stunning and striking, but they've led to an impoverishment of the human soul. They have sought to deprive the universe of meaning and simply to present us with a mass of dead matter upon which we human beings operate. I think in antiquity the universe was seen as filled with life and soul and beauty,
sure.
and not as dead matter at all. And there's an enormous amount of evidence for this. That's one of the reasons why I think it's important to recover our lost past and to realize that the trajectory that we are on at the moment is not the only trajectory that can lead to fulfillment and material plenty, that there are other trajectories as well which are perhaps less destructive and much more positive and much more meaningful in terms of the human spirit.
Sure. Now you say this civilization wasn't either, maybe, I guess, spacefaring, but obviously your Mars book.
I wrote the Mars book with Robert Travell.
Sorry, yes, Robert.
Yes, and John Grigsby. Yes, it's certainly interesting that there are structures on Mars that appear to be artificial. We can't know. I mean, I've seen examples here on planet Earth where two geologists disagree on a rock structure in front of them as to whether it's man-made or natural.
That was kind of happened with Yonaguni in a sense, didn't it? When other people kind of...
With Yonaguni, some geologists think it's natural, some geologists think it's man-made. If you can get differences of opinion amongst professionals on an object that you can actually touch, how much more complicated it is where you're dealing with photographs sent back by NASA from the planet Mars. I felt it was worthy of investigation. My part of that book concentrated entirely on cosmic cataclysms and on the cataclysmic history of Mars, the fact that Mars has at some point been stripped of half of its outer crust and clearly has suffered a major cosmic event. I was interested in that, and it's part of the background that led me to Magicians of the Gods, because when I started hearing the news of the comet impact, when that first entered the scientific press in 2007, I was already prepped because of the work I'd done on the Mars mystery to understand how dangerous comets actually can be, and the devastating effects that they can have when they strike a planet.
Yeah. No, it's strange. I mean, is it Cairo that means Mars? Is that
Cairo does mean Mars?
Yeah.
Yes.
And Mars, again, it strangely speaks to us like on a deep human level. I think it goes back into myth and antiquity itself, of course.
Sure. We need to get there and find out what's going on. I mean, I just think that there are so many mysteries that humanity needs to be inquiring into. It's very unfortunate that we divert so much of our energies to warfare, and hatred and fear and suspicion, and we're always ready to raise the budgets for the latest weapon of mass destruction. But actually to explore the mystery of existence, which includes exploring our immediate cosmic environment, and also journeying within, we need to explore the mysteries of human consciousness as well. Very little of this is being done, and that gives me the sense that our culture has somewhat lost its way.
Yeah. Well, I feel, I mean, this has been said a million times, but spiritually we're not as advanced as our technology. So I think if we did get to Mars, we'd just start, ISIS would get there, we'd start hacking off the heads of the Martian architecture and stuff.
This is the problem. The whole adventure of the exploration of space is being cast in the material terms that our culture loves so much, that here are planets that we are going to exploit. I mean, we've already exploited this one and done so much damage to it and disrespected this fabulous gift that the universe gave us. The danger is that as we go to Mars and the Moon and other parts of the solar system, that we're just going to be exploiting them. We're going to be treating them as dead matter that we're going to mine for our economic advantage, and that would be most unfortunate.
Or taking that brand of human evil.
Or what?
Or taking that brand of human evil to a new world.
Exporting it around the universe as it's already been exported around the world. These are issues that we're going to have to pay attention to. It seems to me that humanity is at a turning point. We need a major shift in consciousness if we are to continue to function on this planet and not destroy ourselves utterly. We need that shift in consciousness, and when that shift in consciousness comes, then our whole attitude to the exploration of our cosmic environment will change, and it will become a spiritual adventure, not an economic enterprise. And that's fundamentally what it is. Finding out who we are is a spiritual adventure, and we need to make sacred again those inquiries rather than reduce everything to economic imperatives.
I was just going to move on to consciousness now. You've obviously had ayahuasca experiences. I believe you did, LSD in university and things.
I left university. I first took LSD in 1974. Was my first experience with a psychedelic. It was amazing. But I didn't go back to psychedelics until 2003 when I began researching my book, Supernatural, Meetings with the Ancient Teachers of Mankind, which was about a transformation in human consciousness that took place during what we call the Stone Age, and that appears to have been directly linked to the consumption of psychedelic plants. In order to research that book, I needed to experience the psychedelic, the visionary plants myself, and that's why I first went to the Amazon and drank ayahuasca. I've continued to drink ayahuasca since then, long after the research on that book finished because I regard it as important personal work.
Yeah, I've got friends that have tried ayahuasca. I have a friend who did, is it iboga in the summer?
I've taken iboga as well.
Yeah, they said it was quite a terrifying experience, and it was.
Yeah, I'm not in a rush to take iboga again. Iboga is the plant that enables men to see the dead. That's what it's called in Central Africa. It's the root bark of a bush, and the root bark is psychoactive. We have an extract from it in the West called ibogaine,
that breaks people of addiction. Is that correct in a lot of
yes,
the
it's
cases?
helpful in getting people, very helpful in getting people off addictions to hard drugs, as is ayahuasca. In both cases, the process is a revelation. One gets you get an understanding of the course of your life that you've been blocking yourself off from.
Sure.
You get that understanding, and that understanding helps you to get off a harmful addiction to a substance like heroin or cocaine, usually without withdrawal symptoms. The really almost magical effects of ibogaine and ayahuasca in breaking the cycle of addiction are sadly unreported in the world today, because the world today considers ayahuasca and iboga as drugs.
Sure.
But they're much more, they're medicines, ancient and sacred medicines that are integrated with the human experience in very, very important ways. I'm not sure that I have got the stamina to undergo another 48-hour ibogaine experience. It really broke me to pieces.
Worse than ayahuasca.
And to be honest, I got less in terms of insights out of it than usually happens with an ayahuasca journey,
Sure.
which is much shorter, 4 hours instead of 48 hours. And although there's some vomiting and diarrhea with ayahuasca from time to time, frankly, it's much less uncomfortable than the iboga experience. So. If I were ever to take iboga again, I would go to Africa and take it in its traditional context rather than taking the active ingredient.
Sure. Do you think what separates you or people in your field, the alternative field, versus actual academics, is it because they've not had, like you had the early psychedelic experience of LSD, which obviously has led to other things, but this inquiring mind that you have, and I did plenty of LSD at, as I left school between 16 and 18. But I think it does awaken something perhaps inside people innately.
I think it does too.
Richard Dawkins, for instance, who kind of, I imagine, has never had a psychedelic experience.
It seems he hasn't, because I challenged him publicly to drink ayahuasca or one of the other, take one of the other powerful psychedelics to see if it would challenge his view of reality. And he kind of said he would, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
I think these experiences, I think one of the interesting things that's happening in science is that we are seeing a new generation of young people coming into positions of power and authority in science. And that generation of young people, almost all of them have had psychedelic experiences. And I think this is subtly changing the direction and the aims and objectives of science. I was recently at a symposium with a group of scientists looking at the intriguing subject dimethyltryptamine, DMT, which is the active.
I tried that last year twice.
It's very interesting. I mean, DMT is the active ingredient of ayahuasca. In the ayahuasca brew, it produces a journey that lasts for about 4 hours. Smoked, you might get 12 minutes.
Yeah, that's what I got. I felt it was quite disturbing in a sense. I'm not sure if that was me trying to hang on to reality and fighting it.
We all do that. We all try to hang on to reality and fight it.
It was like trapped in this continuous cycle that you felt like your mind was slipping away and you couldn't get out, and you had to wait for it to wear off. But it felt like it lasted an eternity at the time. But then people like you said,
expands inside the DMT realms.
Does that improve with further sessions? No.
I mean, smoked DMT has got to be right up there amongst the strangest, the most bizarre, the most challenging, the most disturbing experiences that it's possible for a human being to have. Your whole concept of reality just gets ripped apart.
Sure.
And you're required to contemplate other possibilities. I would say that if we were a wise society, we would make such experiences possible and available in nurturing, helpful contexts, surrounded by love and good advice, because these experiences can be of fundamental importance in personal growth and development. They're not without risks and they're not without danger. I don't want it to be thought that I am just generally advocating psychedelics. Psychedelics are extremely serious business. They need to be approached with a pure intent. and with a desire to learn, regarded as serious personal work, not as recreational play.
Sure.
I'm not against recreational play, but I don't think psychedelics are the right instrument for that. And used for purely recreational purposes, it can be fine, but there can also you can also have severe, very punishing trips as a result of doing that.
I thought that may be a consequence of my age, because I think as the early LSD stuff, when I was a teenager, I took to like a duck to water and it wasn't a problem. But now I'm older and I've lived life, and maybe you're more of an established personality, you've got perhaps more regret or more whatever in your life.
You've got more baggage.
You tend to kind of fight it more, so I'm not sure if it's...
The more baggage you bring to the experience, the more at some level of your consciousness you're aware that the experience is just going to expose all that baggage to you and make you confront it and deal with it. And it's sometimes so painful to deal with our baggage that we fight back and try to resist it, and we don't want it. And that's what's good about smoked DMT, because with smoked DMT, once you hit the dose, there is no choice in the matter. You are gone to that place.
Have you had a breakthrough dose? Is that what the correct term is? A breakthrough?
A breakthrough dose, yes. It's possible to underdose on DMT, where you get some pretty patterns and a faint buzz, but you're not quite there. Believe me, you know when you're there. In my case, it's about 3, maybe 4 hits on the pipe. Good hits, That's the way that it works. And then you are taken into their realm, whatever they are, whether they're a figment of our imagination or whether they're a freestanding parallel reality. I prefer the latter, can't prove it. And you're there until the DMT lets you go. So you have to deal with the experience. With ayahuasca, there's a bit more negotiation. If something gets really scary or really intense, you can usually prevent the visions. You can open your eyes. You can willfully exert your mind and say, no, stop. That's the difference. So if I were to be asked by Richard Dawkins what the ideal psychedelic for him to take, I would say definitely smoked DMT, or even by intravenous infusion, the way that Rick Strassman gave it to his volunteers.
Maybe that's what you need to do. Just kind of roofie him or dose him.
Well, no. Even in joking terms, I'm completely against that. It would have to be with his participation.
No, of course.
But I believe that he might then confront an experience that would change his very dry and materialistic view of reality. I'm not certain of that. It might not do so. It might simply reinforce him in his view. But I think it would be an experience worth having. I think it's an experience worth anybody having. But unfortunately, our society creates a whole network of structure around it that makes it very difficult and very unpleasant, and the whole illegal side of it. We need to move on past that. We need to realize that human beings have been seeking out visionary experiences since we first became human, that it's a fundamental part of our humanity, and that we shouldn't be denying that aspect of our humanity. We should rather be nurturing it, looking for ways to make it as safe and as positive as possible, and seeing what we can learn from it.
Well, the war on drugs obviously is to kind of like, I get a sense, kind of stop people from having these experiences. Do you see decriminalization happening?
Drugs has handed the delivery of the substances over to criminal gangs. And that's obviously a huge policy error. Unless it's deliberate, unless there's some secret cabal within government that wants to empower gigantic armed bureaucracies and give them the right to break down our doors, and at the same time to enrich criminal gangs. If that is actually the policy, then the war on drugs is, fulfilling that policy. It is making criminal gangs richer, and it is empowering huge armed state bureaucracies. But from the point of view of the individual in society, the war on drugs is a really bad thing, and it's caused a huge amount of harm and damage, and we need to get rid of it.
Do you think you'll ever see in your lifetime, or even mine, decriminalization in this country? I know, like Colorado has it, and obviously in Los Angeles.
What's happening in America, individual Americans, state by state, are taking their power back. They're saying that their bodies, their health, their consciousness are their own business, and they are therefore legalizing marijuana, state by state across America.
Well, there's also the cancer connection, isn't there?
Well, the fact is that there's a lot of evidence that cannabis can be very helpful in diminishing the effects of cancer or in curing cancer.
Sure.
We need more research on this. Not enough science has been done. The evidence is largely anecdotal, but it's very, very, very positive so far. So we have a medicine here which should be available to adults should they choose to use it. And what we're seeing is a grassroots movement to take that power away from central government and put it into local hands. Just a couple of days ago, what is it now, the 22nd, I think it was the 19th, we have an election in Canada with a prime minister, one of whose manifesto pledges is to legalize cannabis. So we are likely to see legal cannabis in the entire country of Canada within the next couple of years. And then, of course, you have Colorado, you have Oregon, you have Alaska, you have Washington State, where it's legal. You have more than 20 states in the U.S. where medical marijuana is already legal. So what we're getting is a clawback from the horrors of the war on drugs. The people are actually taking their power back. And they're disproving all the lies. Really, the situation in Colorado is extremely positive. There were all sorts of prognostications about how if they made cannabis legal, society would collapse.
Reefer madness. It's like the 50s.
All of that propagandistic ideological rubbish that we've had pumped at us for the last 40 or 50 years, by the way, paid for by ourselves with our taxpayers' money.
Sure.
We've been systematically lied to. Well, the case of Colorado is proving that those are lies, that the emperor actually does wear no clothes, and that when you make marijuana legal, you do not get a collapse of society. You get an integration of society, much more tax money coming in, and everybody happy.
Sure. What was I going to say? Well, it's only under state law, isn't it? It's federal law can come in and still take away the grow operation, or has that changed now?
I think the federal authorities in America realize what they're grappling with. You just can't be the federal government and take on the American people in that way. There has been a fundamental change of mood in the United States, and that change of mood is sweeping across the country. And it happens that the issue of cannabis is at the leading edge of that. People may think this is very small. Oh, it's just about people wanting to get high. No, it's not about that. The reason that the legalization of cannabis matters is that it recognizes the fundamental sovereignty of the adult to make choices about his or her own body and his or her own consciousness. It recognizes that while we do no harm to others, what we do with our consciousness is entirely our own business and is none of the business of the state. And so I value the way that Americans, state by state, are driving central government out of their consciousness and retaking the high ground of their own consciousness and claiming possession of it. It is ours, we are sovereign over it, and the government can go away. This is a very positive development, and it has implications across society as a whole. It isn't just about...
Well, I was going to say even academia. Do you think you'll have an easier time with the academics if they all start smoking weed?
Well, I'm sure quite a lot of them are smoking weed already. I don't know. I think we live in an interesting time.
Sure.
Ideas are shifting and changing rapidly. New information is coming forward. New networks are forming because of the internet. We no longer rely on the people of our own nation for our companionship. Now we may be companions with the whole world thanks to the internet. We don't have to have these narrow divisions like where we were born or the color of our skin or our religious background. The internet's about sharing ideas, and that sharing of ideas is changing the world.
Well, that's why we're speaking, obviously. But I guess in a world where this program has been made possible, we're speaking to each other screen to screen. That wouldn't be possible even maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
No,
but
this is all very new.
Yeah,
we're dealing with the implications of a new technology, and it happens potentially to be a very liberating technology. What's the problem, of course, is that
the Arab Spring was done via Twitter, wasn't it? That stuff. So
yes, of course. But what the problem is that the old dominator powers, the central governments, the big corporations,
the big religions,
are trying to take control of the technology of the internet so that it serves their agenda. Rather than the open and new agenda of global communication, which is really valuable and which helps to demythologize us from one another. It's possible to feel that the citizens of another country are our enemies and our strangers if they're kept distant. But if we're communicating with them day to day over the internet, actually we don't want to fight them anymore. We want to talk to them, and there are huge vested interests in keeping us divided by fear and hatred and suspicion. And those are the vested interests of big government, big corporations, and big religions.
Sure.
This is what's changing. It's an exciting time to live. We are part of a process. 200 years from now, historians are going to look back on this time and see it as the moment when humanity transformed itself.
Sure. Well, as you closed out your talk, just before we wrap up at Foyles in London, you said, as in the book as well, we're heading towards an imminent global cataclysm with so much money being spent on like defense and military and stuff.
Yeah, I'd like to be clear about that. It is not inevitable that we are heading towards a cataclysm.
We're due on though, no?
We live in a rather dangerous cosmic environment. The Earth is surrounded by flying objects called asteroids and comets.
Sure.
We pass through the debris stream of a fragmented giant comet twice a year. It's called the Torrid meteor shower. I'm speaking to you in late October, and we are already passing through the Torrid meteor stream at the moment. The Torrid meteor stream is the remnant, it's the debris field of a giant comet spread out along the whole orbit of that comet. That's the comet that bits of which hit the Earth 12,800 years ago. And astronomical calculations indicate that some large bits of that comet are still in orbit in the Torrid meteor stream and do pose a real and present danger to civilization on Earth. If we were hit by objects on the scale that hit the Earth 12,800 years ago, our civilization definitely would not survive. Humanity would survive, but this complex, interlinked technological culture would not survive. So what I'm saying is, not doom and gloom, not the end of the world is nigh. I'm misrepresented if people suggest I'm saying that. What I'm saying is, let's pay attention to our cosmic environment. Instead of spending billions on warfare and weapons of mass destruction that simply further divide us from one another, let's put together a grand collective project of mankind to sweep our immediate cosmic environment clear of large objects that can bring about the end of civilization on Earth. We do not have to be the next lost civilization. We should be paying attention to this. It's irresponsible of us not to do so. The universe has given us a precious gift, this beautiful planet, and the incredible opportunity to be born and to live a life in a human body. We should not turn our background on threats to this amazing garden that we live in. We have the technology to do something about it. All it takes is the will. We need to take our eye off the wars and the mass destruction, and we need to put it on to creating a safe cosmic environment for the Earth and for the future generations of humanity.
Sure. If a cosmic, a last thought now, if a cosmic event did happen and you had to leave one piece of information, I guess, for the new civilization that would have to claw itself out of the primordial soup again, what message would you give to people in the new world, in a sense?
We are not our bodies. We are our consciousness. Pay attention to human consciousness. It's the greatest mystery we'll ever confront.
Cool. Well, with that, Graham Hancock, after listening to old bootleg tapes with you on Dreamland with Art Bell, and I think in the early 2000s, looking at your books, watching you on History's Mysteries on the Discovery Channel. I love your work, sir. I do hope we can do this again. I've had a wonderful time.
Good, it's been fun talking to you.
Yeah, no, well, you're off to America next week, I guess, so...
Yes, I am, yeah.
To do battle, but I think they'll be more accepting of your work. Is it England that kind of like you have trouble with versus America? Are they more open to ideas in a sense?
It's more of a generational thing. The younger generation are very open to my work, and people past the age of 50 less so.
We've all been smoking DMT, that's why, Graham.
Well, it could be. It could be. There's an openness to new ideas amongst the younger generation that I really value, and I see the future hope of humanity in that very openness.
Sure. Well, Graham, thank you so much, sir, for coming on. This has been questionable. Where can the people listening or viewing this on YouTube, I will obviously put links below the video, anyone who's watching this, to your work. If you go to my page on ethanmckinley.com, you can get access to all of Graham's books, plus his website. I'm assuming that's where they can find you, grahamhancock.com.
My website, grahamhancock.com, is the key portal. Once you go into that, there's links to my author Facebook page, for example, where I'm very active, so you can immediately go to the author Facebook page and like it if you want to see the stuff on it. And also to my Twitter account, and it's all there on my website, links to the book, everything.
Well, and forums, so you can argue amongst each other, basically, with or without Graham. Graham, thank you so much for coming on, sir. It's been a dream come true to speak to you, and I hope we can do this again, either for a new book or just for a chit-chat.
Sure, that would be good.
Good luck in America, sir. Love you.
Keep well. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.